Please give a warm welcome, Lisa Butcher.
I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the Bundjalung country on which I stand today, the Darug country on which I was born, the Gumbaynggirr country on which I live and work, and reflect on all of the First Nations young people that have given me the privilege of hearing their stories. What if I told you that a young person's life trajectory could be changed from simply starting a conversation? Hi, I'm Lisa Butcher, and it is a privilege to be standing up here in front of you all today amongst a list of speakers I thought I could only dream of presenting alongside. I'm a mother, crocheter, dog lover, singer-songwriter, musician, podcaster, and scuba diver. I'm also a clinical psychologist. I've worked mainly with adolescents since I started practicing psychology 10 years ago. I've worked for Aspect, Headspace, Youth Justice, and private practice. And I am so passionate about helping young people as they navigate the very difficult period of adolescence. And that is why I'm here today. I firstly want to share with you what led me into psychology and working with young people. So this is me, if you haven't guessed. I wasn't the popular kid in school. I was a bit of a loner, a bit of a teacher's pet. I got to class before the bell rang with my books and pencil case in hand, eager to learn. I was overweight, I had glasses, still got them, and braces, and I was the perfect target for bullies. My saving graces were my schoolwork, my beautiful parents who took me to the Cook Islands when I was 10 years old. Yay! Yay! Music and the school psychologist. My experiences at school contributed to me wanting to help other young people not feel as alone as I did and to give them a safe space to talk about their struggles. During my honours year, I was a volunteer telephone counsellor for Lifeline, and I helped talk a suicidal teenage girl down, uniting her with supports at the end of our 4-hour call. During a placement at the university clinic, I facilitated a young man telling his older brother how he felt. During a placement with Child Protection, I had the privilege of colouring in with a young girl whilst we watched the film Inside Out as a tool to help her regulate her emotions. Thank you. I think I'll be right. I then landed my dream job at Headspace, fresh out of uni, where I engaged with hundreds of young people using out-of-the-box therapy sessions to build rapport, where we'd play some Uno, eat some gummy bears, write a song together, play a bit of ukulele, watch some YouTube clips of narwhals, and I even took one young person to go get some ice cream. Working with young people has been and continues to be an absolute privilege. And the beautiful parents that presented yesterday of the young girl that I had the honour of working with is the reason that I do the work that I do. It is important to acknowledge that the opinions I'm about to share are mine personally and professionally as a clinical psychologist and do not represent the views of the Department of Communities and Justice. I can't say anything bad because I'd get in trouble, so it's all good. I'm just saying it's my opinion. All right. I've had the privilege of working with some of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged young people in the state of New South Wales. I've provided much needed assessment, diagnosis and intervention. As part of my role, I have the cool job of routinely taking young people on drives, engaging in yarns, and they can go from being in a severe state of distress to one of calm, where they get to listen to their favourite rap music and eat some KFC. Young people in general are often misunderstood. They can be seen as defiant, disrespectful, impulsive, risk-taking, secretive, selfish, always on their bloody phones. But I see through all of that. I see excitement, fun, growth, humour, intensity, passion, and a real rawness. And I compel you all to see the same. Let's start seeing these behaviours through a different lens. Instead of seeing naughty children or bad kids or young people these days, let's start seeing these impossible behaviours as possible symptoms. And we may then react with compassion instead of anger. And compassion may motivate us to do something other than punishment. To care in order to prevent these behaviours from getting worse. Behaviours that can become so destructive they are criminal offences. And we can start seeing a diagnosis such as FASD not as an excuse but as an explanation. FASD occurs in all parts of society where alcohol is consumed. What led to my interest in FASD was seeing young people with an alphabet soup of diagnoses, with a key one often missing, this being FASD. One young person I was working with was having a really tough time at home, and it got me thinking, what is actually going on here? Several months later, when that same young person had sadly been kicked out of home, I managed to make a referral to the wonderful Dr. Meg, and collaboratively we diagnosed them with FASD and got them on the NDIS and also a disability support pension. One young man that I was working with had no diagnoses at the age of 18, and up until that point had previously refused to see a psychologist. And I thought, challenge accepted. He actually agreed to meet with me during one of his scheduled caseworker appointments. Rapport was easily established and he agreed to let me assess him. He was impaired in 5 out of 10 domains, and due to time constraints with an upcoming court date, I actually only had time to assess 5 domains. So he probably had impairment in more than that. We got him on the NDIS and he obtained full-time employment, and he went from being a young man that would never see a psychologist to one that would engage in meaningful conversations on our drives between his workplace and home. Unfortunately, young people with FASD are often predisposed to offending behaviours, and many young people with FASD find it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to connect the sentence to their crime. Their brains simply do not understand cause and effect, that their actions have consequences. So if we can start leaning into prevention, we can prevent these children from ever coming into contact with the justice system. So let's start a conversation. Let's talk to people about drinking when we're having a drink. I'm not at the moment because I'm breastfeeding. Drinking is rife in our Australian culture, as we all know. It's a rite of passage. It's a must-do at nearly every social event. But what if, God forbid, we didn't say yes to a drink when offered? What would actually happen? Why should women have to disclose that they are trying for a baby just because they refuse a drink or come up with some other excuse? We need to share the knowledge that there is no safe amount of alcohol to drink during conception, pregnancy, and breastfeeding. And as Dr. Elizabeth said yesterday, 49% of pregnancies are unplanned. This means that women may have been drinking up until they test positive or miss a period. When I told my GP I was trying for a baby, her exact words were, "Don't be too worried if you've been drinking and you later find out you're pregnant, as the baby's in a protective bubble for the first 8 weeks. No, they're not. That is absolute rubbish. All right, that could be not further from the truth, as the first 8 weeks is the most critical period for brain development. And luckily, I was actually studying a graduate certificate in FASD before I conceived my gorgeous 6-month-old son, and I didn't drink at all. So I'm glad I didn't follow the advice of my doctor. Now, as one young man said to me during our session in which we discussed contraception, "Don't be silly, wrap your willy." We need to encourage men and women to use contraception if they are having unprotected sex and drinking alcohol. This is not a woman's problem, it's an everyone problem. And men are just as accountable for using contraception. More and more studies are coming to light about the impacts of alcohol on sperm quality and motility. We simply do not know enough yet. So if every person in this room can talk to one person in their social networks, be that your child's school, your workplace, local sports team, your choir, whatever you guys do for fun, even on your social media accounts, then someone in one of those groups might talk to someone in their social circles, and through conversation, we may just have the shared knowledge that could be the catalyst for change. All parties need to be made aware of the impacts of drinking alcohol on an unborn baby so they can make informed choices about contraception and drinking. Why? Because any amount of alcohol can cause harm. If you're going to take a picture of any slide, this is the one, people. This is from my course I did through UWA, and it highlights that alcohol has the most profound effects on the developing brain out of any drug, including heroin, meth, cocaine, tobacco, and marijuana. I didn't know that until I studied this course. So why aren't health professionals asking about drinking during pregnancy? At both my antenatal classes and antenatal appointments, alcohol was barely mentioned and my drinking habits were never questioned. Instead, smoking was the main focus. And I think everyone here knows more people drink than smoke, I think. I don't know the exact numbers on that, but I would assume so. So luckily, yeah, like I said before, I did my own research. So I actually took it upon myself to print and laminate this slide and give it to my midwife. So can you put this up on the ward, please? Hopefully she did. So it should be mainstream clinical practice to ask about prenatal alcohol exposure at any point of contact with the healthcare system, because symptoms can develop over time so that a child that may seem neurotypical can start to display these problematic behaviours in adolescence. So we need to encourage mothers to disclose that they've had a drink during conception or pregnancy at the earliest possible stage. And we need to communicate that they won't get in trouble for doing that we won't take their children off them, but instead we have information that can result in their child getting the most appropriate and targeted supports down the track. So let's start universal screening at a mother's first contact with the healthcare system, especially when she's, trying for a baby. That would be an ideal point to start these conversations. And let's start then, keep it going and keep checking in. So what is important is what we can do from now, from this point forward. It's about providing education, educating those around us, educating school students in their health classes about the impacts of alcohol on the developing brain for them as adolescents, but also when they start having sex and having their own families one day. We need to educate students at university level. Sadly, FASD wasn't even mentioned during my psychology training. We need to educate teachers and parents on what behaviours to look out for. And if we can keep kids in school, this is one of the biggest protective factors in keeping them out of our criminal justice system. So I want you to imagine a little child with FASD that might have grown up to then go on to, say, steal cars with his mates and end up in our system. And imagine what would happen if we actually saw him for his strengths, like all the ones on this slide. Imagine if he was truly seen and if he was truly heard and truly cared for, what he could grow up to be. So let's start a conversation and make a shift from the person being the problem to the person having a problem. From it being simply a behavioural issue to a very complex physical one. From seeing a child that won't do something to a child that simply can't. And let's shift the focus of intervention off of the person and onto the environment. So let's keep this conversation going. Let's respond to people's rigid views with some curiosity. Let's plant seeds of thought in their mind so that they can get thinking and get talking and get reading. And eventually, one person at a time, we can change the narrative. We can change how people see young people. We can live in a world that would ideally nurture every child in every context so that they can thrive. So I encourage you all here to start a conversation, to educate others on the harmful impacts of drinking, to educate others on children's behaviours that may in fact be symptoms of something much greater. And together, one person at a time, we can reduce the chance of a young person ever coming into contact with the criminal justice system. I'd now like to play an original song, written, accompanied and sung by yours truly. And in the words of Carl Barron, it goes exactly like this. Feel free to sing along.
Do you remember what it was like to be young? Do you remember what it was like to be free and have fun? What if we saw strengths instead of what is wrong? And what if we healed the trauma that's been underneath all along? And what if we reacted kindly instead of getting mad? And what if these kids learned they were special instead of being bad? Let's start a conversation, let's start a conversation, let's start. There's a saying that everyone says kids these days, we're trying to get them to change their ways. But what if we started a conversation and never let it fade away? What if we as adults fix the problems we create? And what if we learn to listen instead of giving advice? And what if we could teach our kids to be compassionate and nice? Let's start a conversation, let's start. Everyone, let's start a conversation, let's start. All together, let's start a conversation, let's start. Let's start a conversation, let's start. One last time, let's start a conversation, let's start.